outside of their tribe, outside of their nationality, outside of their ethnicity. And so by him marrying someone who was Nubian, Imam Jawad is obviously comes out much darker. The complexion of his skin was darker. It says his hair was curly. And so people came and they said, "Oh, this isn't one of the imams," and they kind of denied that maybe some people said that this was somebody else. You just are saying this is your imam, and that maybe the Waqifis are right and they're following the right path because this isn't your son. You don't have any sons. And so there were people who had the skill and talent that they could tell this was part of their skill set, that they could tell any person who was the child or what lineage they were from by looking at them, by observing them. And it mentions that in a setting that they bring a group of people to one of these very wise experts, and the expert looks and and they're asking him, which one of these people in this circle is this child the son of? And the expert looks at them. He says, none of these people that I can see. They were in a garden. And none of these people that I could see, they said, but maybe that person there who's the gardener, who was Imam Rida alayhi salam, he said, maybe if anyone, it's him. He's the person who was the father of this child. And so through this way, it was almost that he had to prove that Imam Jawad alayhi salam was actually the son of the Imam. Now, this is a point to the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Had Allah given Imam Rida many sons, we could see the dilemma. For example, if he had another wife who was from maybe the same tribe, we could see the dilemma of what would happen with Imam at that point as well. That some people would clearly, because they were already denouncing Imam Jawad, so clearly if there was another son, oh, this one looks more like he should be the Imam, maybe they would have diverted and followed a different path. So in Allah's wisdom, he has this one son. And this one is the one who becomes the Imam. So just even that nature of going against the grain of what was even that time considered to be a type of discrimination. That the Imams came and set a different tone for what was social justice. I mean, this is not something that just Imam Rida did. I mean, from the time of the Prophet, this was something that was a norm. Where the traditions of how, for example, even how slavery existed pre-Islam, and how Islam became a method that someone who was technically, maybe slave is not a good word to use in this regard, but someone who was technically considered a slave or had an owner, the rights that they had were similar to the rights of many other people in that regard, that they were to be provided for, that they could not be abused. It wasn't that they were essentially like an indentured servant to some extent. So the Islam came and it really changed this kind of way that people looked and dealt with people who were of different backgrounds, especially people who were of African descent. The Bilal Habashis and the likes of that, who became honorable people amongst society. People were, obviously you know the story of Bilal and how he could not pronounce the adhan properly, the Sa'd letter, or the Shin letter. There were some letters he could not pronounce very clearly. And it was something that really burned those people who were saying that, well, we're better. And what the Prophet was trying to make clear was that concept of what Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Hujarat, where it says, and it speaks to all of mankind here. There are places in the Quran where Allah speaks to a certain group or certain individual or a certain group of people. And there are places where Allah speaks and it's clearly that the message is speaking specifically or referencing everyone. It says, Ya ayyuhan nas, all of mankind. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We created you from a single male and female. Wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila. And we made you into different tribes and nations. So the first thing that Allah is reminding people that all of humanity, you have a common origin. إِنَّا خَلَقْ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ is saying جَعَلْنَاكُمْ. That means we made you into different tribes and different nations. Not coincidence, not something we wanted to have these differences. In another verse it says about min ayat, from the signs of Allah is the creation of the heavens and the earth, وَاخْتِلَافَ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانَكُمْ, the differences in your colors and languages. It says this is one of the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah is saying, with the presence of this ayat, remember that you have this common origin, and remember that akramakum indallah atqakum, that the best of you in His eyes is the one who is most noble, who is most worthy. So the mother of Imam Jawad was a pious woman. She was known as being a pious and noble person with taqwa, and this was the reason why she was selected to be the spouse of Imam Rida alayhi salam. So he went against a norm. He changed maybe some things of the way that people did things, or what was socially considered to be socially acceptable. Now moving to Imam Jawad alayhi salam. The reason why, the base of the idea of what we were talking about leadership and about going against the grain sometimes when necessary, if it contradicts our Islamic beliefs and principles, the idea of this is from in the life of Imam Jawad. One example of this, rather, is the example of when he's a young child and he's playing with all the other children. The children are playing in the street. And at the time Ma'mun comes by, the ruler is approaching and walking by, and there are kids playing, and everyone's afraid of Ma'mun, And the ruler is coming, everyone does what? They scatter, they all run away. Everyone runs away and scatters except for Imam Jawad. And when Imam Jawad is asked what's the reason why he didn't run, Ma'mun approaches him, who are you? He says, I'm Muhammad. Because he's Muhammad Taqi, son of Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam. And he explains who he is and who his lineage is from. He tells him that he asks him, why don't you run? All the other kids are running, why aren't you afraid? Why aren't you running? He says 2 reasons. 1, there's enough room for me to be here, for you to get by. I'm not blocking the road. 2, I didn't do anything wrong. I have no reason that I need to be afraid or I need to run. So what was maybe normal amongst children of that time and age, with that divine maturity, the way that he handles things is completely different. And it sets a different tone in that relationship, and a different respect that he has to have for someone of his age, even being the imam. There were lots of people who came, we wanted to come from this place, from that. We have to ask the imam certain questions. He's very young. Is he truly this knowledgeable? And the imam obviously proved himself time and time again through his knowledge. But it wasn't just through knowledge, it was through his character as well. Now, tonight, I wanted to go into a different topic, a hadith that a lot of you might be familiar with. It's a very beautiful hadith. And this hadith is a tradition that has been, it's from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But it's a tradition and hadith that has been used as a means for a person's spiritual development. And maybe, I think it might have been like 2010, 2008, they did a poll in people living in the States. And the poll was about which religions that they're drawn to or attracted to or interested in, regardless of what religion they may be currently a part of. And it was interesting that a large number of people, that there was such a growing interest in things which seem to have spirituality. People were drawn to, for example, Buddhism. A lot of Americans were drawn to Islam or Sufism. A lot of them were even drawn to some deviant paths of Wicca and things like that. But the, in some ways, common idea, at least, between these is that it's a conversation, or it's giving some ideas and concepts beyond what meets the eye, about the unseen, and about some things that people know exist but don't understand. Maybe science is never going to actually be able to, in this method, academic science, may not ever come to a conclusion specifically about the presence of the soul or how the soul exists, although some scientists obviously have. There was a neurologist at Harvard that did. And then people may come to these conclusions, they may not, but everyone knows there has to be something that exists. I'm not just simply these bones and, eyes and ears and, or even just this brain. I'm more than that. So this essence of my identity of who I am spiritually, what is that? And if there's not a lot of answers academically, I have to look for where are these answers going to be. I know that the whole, in all of cosmology and the creation of the universe and the heavens, that there's things that scientists, sometimes they grasp on. The earth is, the world, the universe is expanding, so on and so forth, how vast that it is. But I know that there has to be something more to this. The concept of intelligent design, that everything didn't happen haphazardly, that randomly just boom and the earth existed in the way that it exists, and the precision that exists. It's like someone saying, taking a very precise watch that is ticking and saying, boom, it just came to be like this. It's ticking and the seconds are working perfectly. Every gear is turning perfectly, but it just happened because, boom. It's very hard to fathom. So people are looking for something deeper than what sometimes academic science is offering. And this is one of the reasons why there's this kind of push towards spirituality. Now, this is in favor of Islam and Muslims. And we want to do tabligh because we have paths and answers which they have not begun to even contemplate yet. Begin to contemplate yet. How many people are drawn to Islam because of what it has said about Islam, just its scientific approach, and just its idea of the thoughts and things that it said about creation? I know a person who he was a singer or a rapper, and once he was narrating himself, he said, I opened up Natural Balagha for the first time. He said, and I began to read about the creation of the universe. He said, I felt like my mind exploded, that it was so deep an analysis. He said, it was being described to me as if someone was watching the universe being created and was writing the story down about this was how the universe was created. These gases came to be like this, the earth, the water, etc., etc. He said, I was completely bewildered by how in-depth this was. Who said this? Where did this come from? And he was drawn to the path of the Ahlul Bayt just in this way. In areas where a text like that from so long ago, and so many other things about Islam, how it speaks about, how the creation and the stages of an infant till the time that it's born. Or, for example, where it mentions about the 7 heavens and the 7 earths, and these 7 layers that geologists have come to recognize. And many, many, many other different realities that Islam, that affirms through science, the realities that Islam is teaching, which is just one truth. So through all of these things, and about especially those things that have to do with spirituality, you see people are drawn to looking for these answers. My soul exists. Where does it exist? How does my soul exist? How does my ruh exist? Imam Sadiq explains where the ruh exists, how it exists. What happens after a person leaves this world? In what realm? In what fashion? In what way? These are answers that Islam has. And so people showing that they were drawn towards these types of spirituality. When it talks about how the Prophet came to perfect the akhlaq, the makarim al-akhlaq of human beings, it's reaching a person to reach their perfections. A person is created with these potentials, and they want to get to the height of their potentials and their perfections. They need a way to do that. Islam has said this is the way. It's given us a path and a means for us to get to that point. So in the teachings of the Ahl al-Bayt especially, we have a concept of irfan and a concept of gnosis or Islamic spirituality or mysticism. And this is the idea of not just empirical learning, but the learning of the reality of everything and the realities that exist. Learning of how a person achieves their ultimate spirituality. If they're more than just this physical body, in the same way that they have a means to take care of their physical body, they go to the doctor, they take care of themselves, they do exercise, they eat certain foods, etc., etc. If they are more than this, then that reality has to have some means to also achieve its perfections. How does that soul achieve its perfection? How does the soul become exercised? How does it reach a certain level? How does it become closer to God, so to speak? So Urafa and scholars of Irfan have taught in different ways this path of achieving that closeness to Allah, and this path of achieving that spiritual purification, of learning the answers to these questions. And so amongst these different teachings, one of them is this particular hadith. Many of you have heard of Ayatollah Behjat as being one of the incredible scholars or urafa or mystics, one of the incredible spiritual people. Many of you have heard stories about him. There's books about stories about his life, accounts and statements from people who interacted with him, who knew him, who said about things that they experienced with him. There's so many. But someone like this who gets to be on this level, who has this type of understanding, people will come and ask him questions. Sometimes they would not ask him a question, but he would still tell them the answer. One of the ulama, an Ayatollah, he said, I had this question in my heart, and we went to a class. He said, it got late, I didn't get a chance to ask him the question. And so I didn't want to take too much of his time, so, I wanted to leave. He said, he told me the answer to the question. What does it take to have that person? Because this is not the eyes of these eyes that see these things. It's insight and the eyes within that see and understand this kind of level. When he talks about his teachers talking about his own self-purification stages, for example, he goes through a process where throughout his devotion and supplication and prayer and other things, and I'll want to talk more about some of those, how they were tomorrow, but throughout part of this process is a point where it mentions that when he used to go to the store, he would not look at people. Like when he first really became, or it was evident at least to him, that he was seeing the essence of every human being. You know how it mentions in the Quran, لِيُرَوْا أَعْمَالَهُمْ? that people will see, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَى وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَى. That atom's weight of good that a person did, they will see that. If they did an ounce of bad, they will see that on the day of judgment. It's a reality. Meaning that good action is like it's real. It's living. The actions that we do are like that. They are very real. They are manifest into something. They look like something. It's no different than the effects that it has on a person's body. If someone, for example, through excessive use of drugs, maybe they look like they're broken. They look like it's had an effect and drained them physically. If something is abusive happens to a human being's face, it looks like that. You see the effects. Spiritually, their actions of backbiting or eating something haram or anything like this, they have an effect on a person, and those are evident for the person who can see them. Says he will walk to the store and cover his, eyes in this way and not even look. One of my teachers was telling me. As to not even want to see this manifest of how ugly so many people look inside, their reality. One of the Urafas said, I went from one city to another city and I saw maybe 2 or 3 people. Not that he saw 2 or 3 people. He saw hundreds of people. He said 2 or 3 of them looked like people. The rest were so overcome with their own ego, with their own greed, with their own selfishness, with their own vices, that is what they look like. The manifestation of those vices or of those sins that they committed. So he also learned from his teacher, and this hadith was one of the requirements for his teacher to accept the person as a student, that they should accept this particular hadith. And they should accept it in the sense of not, okay, that's a good hadith, it sounds like, something Imam Sadiq said, alayhi salam, but to accept it in a sense of acting upon it, that they should carry it with them. Or in some cases it says they should memorize it, or that they should act upon it. They should act upon what the tenets of this hadith were. So this is what I'm going to mention about tonight, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Has anyone heard of the hadith of Unwan al-Basri before? Okay. So it says Unwan al-Basri was living in Medina. It's the name of this person. He was 94 years old. Okay. He says that, I'll read part of the hadith. And Unwan al-Basri wa kana Sheikhan kabira. He was, here it means Sheikh means elderly person. He was an elderly person who was who had reached Arba'a wa Tis'una sana. He had reached 94 years of age. And he says that he used to go to the lessons and classes of Malik ibn Anas. كنت أخلف إلى Malik ibn Anas. I used to go and spend time with and interact with Malik ibn Anas, who was a teacher. And he says, فَلَمَّا قَدَمَ جَعْفَرَ الصَّادِقَ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ, when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq came to the city of Medina, I wanted to interact with Imam Ja'far. I mean, I had understood about his level of spirituality, his level of knowledge, the number of students that he had. I wanted to go and to learn from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. I was spending time with Malik ibn Anas. I had this opportunity. Imam Sadiq comes to town, and I want to. If the Imam Mahdi Ajalallah Ta'ala Farajul Sharif comes to Austin, you're going to want to spend time there. You're going to say, let me go and let me learn something from this Imam. So without doubt, he felt that this was a great opportunity. He goes to the Imam. He wants to learn from him. Now, the hadith is long, so I'm abbreviating it. When he goes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, I want to learn from you. Teach me something. The Imam tells him, Inni rajulun matlub. I'm a man very sought after from the government. I'm under surveillance. I'm always being watched. The government was not just openly allowing them. He was teaching, but still they were under, like the imams always were, under not necessarily protection, but surveillance of the government. And he says, and in addition to that, I have my awrad. I have many different litanies and dhikrs that I recite and say throughout the day and night. So why don't you go back to your teacher, Malik ibn Anas, and go and learn from him? I'm very busy. Don't bother me with, all of these questions. I'm very busy. Now, before continue, just think about this. What just happened? Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is the most knowledgeable of all human beings on the planet of the time. He is, we refer to the Shia school of thought as the Ja'fari school of thought. A man, an elderly man, who has been studying for so long and was a student of a teacher, comes to the Imam of the time. He says, I want you to learn, I want to learn from you. The Imam says, in so many words, I'm busy. I have other things to do. Why would the Imam say this? Hold the thought and think about what is happening or why this happened or what is the purpose, what is the reason for this response. Why didn't the Imam just say, well, this is a hadith or this is an ayat of Quran? Why didn't he just respond to him at that time? So, in the long story, he ends up leaving. He gets a second opportunity to see Imam Sadiq after some time. Is you say Allah salawat for them? This second time he comes to the house of Imam Sadiq. He knocks on the door. I want to see the Imam. I have to see him. I want to. Servant answers the door. He says the Imam is in prayer. Then he says to wait. He goes back. He says, okay. The Imam said, it's okay. You can come in. Come enter. So Unwan al-Basri comes into the house of the Imam. He sits in his presence. And he exchanges, asks him his name. And Unwan was so happy at this moment that the Imam had basically given him some time. The Imam made a dua for him. And he says in the hadith, he says to himself that if I didn't get anything else but that one dua that the Imam made for me, then I would have been happy just even at that. He begins to ask the Imam for advice. But before he asks the Imam for advice, he asks the Imam to teach him, to give him knowledge. He says, give me some knowledge. Give me some ilm. The Imam's profound answer is an explanation of what knowledge is and how it should be acquired, how to reach knowledge. I would say that 99% of us have a misunderstanding of what knowledge is. According to Imam Sadiq, knowledge is not that which we think it is. Sometimes for us, knowledge is information. A lot of facts, a lot of stories. Not necessarily what its essence should be. So what the Imam explains to him when he tells him to give me some ilm, he tells Unwan al-Basri, ليس العلم بالتعلم. Knowledge is not simply learning. It's not simply that a person memorized some facts or he read some books and he's knowledgeable. He explains knowledge, إِنَّمَا هُوَ نُورٌ. He says knowledge is a light. يَقَعَ فِي قَلْبِ مَنْ يُرِيدُ اللَّهِ. A light that manifests in the heart of the person who Allah wills, and يَهْدِيهُ, who He wills to guide. So if you want knowledge, فَإِنْ أَرَدْتَ الْعِلْمِ فَاطْلُبْ أَوَّلًا فِي نَفْسِكَ. So if you want knowledge, first find in yourself حقيقة العبودية, the essence of servitude. Now, let's go over the hadith just one more time. He comes to the Imam, he says, I want knowledge. The Imam responds to him that knowledge is not just learning. What is the prerequisite for that knowledge? It is guidance from Allah. So knowledge means, in the way of the Imam is explaining, it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places in the person He wants to guide them. But He mentions again, there's a prerequisite for that. Before a person receives that guidance from Allah, He says you have to find within yourself حقيقة العبودية. You have to find true servitude. So first, a person needs to find ubudiyah in themselves. Then he receives the guidance from Allah. Then he achieves knowledge. It says if it's not happening in this process, then that which you attain is not knowledge. So then he has to explain, well, what's ubudiyah? What is servitude then? And the Imam explains to him what servitude is. It's when a person, his actions, his deeds, they're only for the sake of Allah. Whatever they give, it's for the sake of Allah. Whatever they do, it's for the sake of Allah. When things happen, they look at everything as being in the hands of Allah. He said, this is a person, when they have these qualities, then they have ubudiyah. He says, see, the person who gives and they're giving from the charity of Allah, like we were explaining the other day about them, like in the example of Imam Jawad alayhi salam, who was known for being Jawad and generous and giving. The person who gives and they know that they're giving from the bounty of Allah, it's very easy to give. That person has ubudiyah. He has understood in themselves the reality of ubudiyah. Because they give easily, freely. They're not attached to that dunya or to anything. And so when things happen, then they look at the things that happen as being in the hands of Allah. It says, and to the extent that they don't make plans for themselves in this way, that not that they don't make plans at all, they make plans, but that whatever comes of that plan, they have to see as Allah being more powerful than anything else. What happens as a result? How many a times do you plan to do something, to go somewhere, to be somewhere, to do something, to say something? That doesn't happen that way. Maybe Allah has a different plan. You still see Allah as being mudabbir of all of the umur, the administer of all of the affairs that happen. That only Allah is really truly in control. Then he goes on to explain to him and give him some advice. So, for knowledge, Imam Sadiq explained first, you have to have ubudiyah. Once you have found ubudiyah within yourself, and it explains in detail what that is, then you go to the next level of receiving guidance from Allah, if Allah wills, meaning that knowledge is for the one who's worthy of that knowledge. So if Allah wills, you receive guidance, and then you have achieved knowledge. And it's in this process. He goes on to give him 9 pieces of advice at the end of the hadith. He said 3 of them have to do with riyadat al-nafs, the self-discipline. 3 of them have to do with hilm and clemency, and 3 of them have to do with ilm, knowledge. And he breaks down each one of these. He tells them to take these hadith and to remember these. Don't take these lightly, to remember and act upon this knowledge. He also explains that ubudiyat and that servitude is acting upon the knowledge and the commands of Allah. Okay. So, a person, when Allah has said to them, for example, don't eat this or pray at this time, it says when a person acts upon these things, they have done their service to Allah. They have obeyed Allah. And because they did their service to Allah, Allah will guide them. And because Allah has guided them, He places in their heart that light of knowledge. He says to the point where they know everything that they need to know. So this is in the commentaries on this hadith are a lot. And in much detail, and much more than what we can conjure into, 1 or 2 lectures. But I advise everyone to, if you have the opportunity to, please look and to, look up the hadith, read the hadith. It's translated in every language, and you can see the details of. I've skipped over some things to be brief. It's about a page long, and see and contemplate on this hadith. Contemplate on what was said, why it was said. There's nothing, the Imam, he doesn't waste his breath. He doesn't say something that's not necessary or helpful. He's not going to say something extra or something less. Unwan al-Basri, the hadith of Unwan al-Basri. Unwan with an ayn, or in English it might be spelled U-N-W-A-N, al-Basri. The 94-year-old man who has this interaction with Imam Sadiq. So there's a lot of lessons that are taken from this, and they are a huge, tremendous part of, used as a huge, tremendous part of spiritual development. And people who who are the Ayatollah Bahjats and the Allama Tabatabais, they went through this hadith to get there. So it's saying a lot. That Allama is Allama, and what he says and mentions about this process of, and what role did this have in him and his spiritual growth. And Ayatollah Bahjat, and so on and so forth. And some people who are less known, but maybe known amongst, scholars, or maybe less known amongst common people. But there's in here some very important lessons, which some of them we mentioned today, and inshallah the rest of them we'll mention tomorrow, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The love of the Ahlul Bayt, please recite one louder salawat. So, the 9 things that the Imam leaves him with, we'll mention briefly some of them. The first 3 had to do with riyadat al-nafs. So this concept of self-discipline and self-refinement, part of why we fast, part of why we do other things that we do. This is mentioned, he sums it into a few different things. He says, first, advice is don't eat when you're not hungry. This is the first advice. When you think about how much emphasis Islam has put on food and its different areas, not in what we eat, but even how we eat, even when we eat. I mean, just the idea of fasting itself, for example. The concept of having a month where a mu'min, a month that's coming up, inshallah, and also recommended during the Ayyam-al-Bid, the 13th, 14th, and 15th of Rajab, 13th, 14th, 15th of Sha'ban, is recommended. It's one of the best times to fast, these 3 days. And there are other days throughout the year. These are some of the very special days that a person, if they're able to, that they should try to take advantage of fasting on those days. And some of the other a'mal that are mentioned in Mafati that they should try to do at that time. But we take a whole month as a Muslim to try to make sure that we are in control and not that food is in control of us. So it means that our most basic human inclination, our most basic animalistic instinct, for example, to eat, is something that we make sure that we are in control of and not the other way around. So it says the first advice he gives them, he says, is not to eat unless you have an appetite. Do not eat with that which you have no appetite for. And secondly, similar to that, do not eat unless you are hungry. And the third part is to do not eat anything that is not lawful, that is not halal. It says when the Prophet goes to Mi'raj and he ascends to the heavens, he sees different things. One of the things that he sees are people, and he asked Jubair, like, what's going on with these people? Their hands were plates. So instead of hands, they had plates. Their hands were made into plates, and there was food in one hand, which was, whatever you can think of as the most delicious, most beautiful, most best smelling, most delicious looking food you can possibly imagine on one plate, and there was just disgusting things on the other plate. And they would ignore this plate and they would eat all of the garbage and the disgusting and the waste and the nasty things from the other plate. And the Prophet asked Jibreel, who are these people? He says, these are the people who did not eat halal. These are the people who, it's just a Big Mac. These are the people who did not eat halal, and these are the consequences. So they literally always chose willingly that even if there was good at their disposal, to eat that which was vile. The next three things he goes have to do with hilm, and then we'll stop at those three things. He says, firstly, if someone says to you, like for example, they say something negative to you, don't respond to them with that same negativity, that you'll do worse to them. That even if they say something to you, if they say a single word to you, you won't hear one thing back from me. So it means that in people's ignorance, I mean, people may say comments or things and do things that are considered ignorant. It's saying that don't have to be as advice, don't have to be someone who responds to these things. It says, we say from a distance, when two fools argue, you can't tell which one is the fool. Or when a fool argues with someone, rather, you can't tell which one is the fool. Someone is an ignorant, foolish person. He argues with someone else, and they're a good person, wise, smart. But from a distance, you see two people arguing. You don't know which one is which. He says the second thing is when someone insults you, say to them, if you're right in what you said, then may Allah forgive me. And if I'm right, then may Allah forgive you. Like it mentions that they would say about insulting comments about the mother of one of the Imams. I believe it was Imam Baqir alayhi salam. That they would make the person who would make insulting comments about the mother of the Imam. Now everyone knows that of all the insulting things that a person can say, the most insulting are the things that a person says about someone's mother. And the most intolerable of all things that a person can say. He says, in this example, this person who was saying bad things, your mother is an indecent, for lack of a better word, an indecent woman. And the Imam responds to this person, how? If my mother was like that, then may Allah forgive her. And if what you're saying is wrong, then may Allah forgive you. Such a control over themselves, and to have a way that actually those words of the Imam were 10 akhlaq lessons for that person, and how to deal with others. And he says, thirdly, when someone treats you harshly, return him with prayer and with good counsel, and pray for him. Malik Ashtar, one of the lions of Imam Ali, one of the generals who's fierce. At the same time, he's one of the people who is humble, and he's walking through the marketplace. Somebody makes fun of him, mocks him, or throws a stone at him. Other guy says to him, that is Malik Ashtar, do you have any idea what you're doing? That is the commander of Imam Ali's army. Do you know who that is? He's VIP. You're making a mistake. And he realizes, oh my goodness, I just, ridiculed or mocked, this great person. He goes to find him, apologize. Finds Malik in the masjid. Malik was in the masjid, and he comes to apologize. He says to him, Wallah, I only came to the masjid to pray for you. That's the only reason I am here. Because I wanted to pray for you. May Allah forgive you. You made a mistake. Is this how we respond to people who do wrong to us? So inshallah, we'll continue with the discussion of this hadith tomorrow. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all the tawfiq and success to be of those people who benefit and act upon this hadith, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.